"Hello," called Izzy into the long tunnel of greenhouse, breathing in the soft tomato plant scent left over from last year's crop, which still lingered in the air. She knew the old gardener was in there as she'd seen his blurred, stooping silhouette through the old uneven glass panes as she'd walked through his yard. "Miss Isabel," returned the gardener, turning around with a kindly smile to face his friendly intruder. Apart from her parents, Mr. Elliot was the only other person in the whole world who called her Isabel. She asked him once to call her Izzy like everybody else, but his reply had been, "I could never bring myself to do that. Your name is Isabel, and as you are a young lady, you should be correctly addressed as Miss. It's only proper." And with that, the subject had never been mentioned again. "I've just been walking Caesar," Izzy said, trying to bring up the subject of his fine grandchildren. "That I can see," returned Mr. Elliot, "what with the beast by your side and all." With that, the old gardener carried on with his work of brushing out his used plant pots with a small wooden-handled brush, then stacking them neatly on his bench, ready to be used again next year. Izzy often brought Caesar over to see the old gardener. The dog and man seemed to share a calm understanding of each other's needs. The gardener liked the company, and the dog loved the heat of the greenhouses and the titbits often brought out by Mrs. Elliot. "I didn't see your grandchildren arrive. Have they been with you overnight?" Izzy asked questioningly. "There's no grandchildren here, Miss Isabel," replied the old gardener. "They only come near when it's for their own gain, and as it's not quite Christmas yet, there's nothing to be gaining from them visiting. We'll not be seeing the likes of them until Thursday, Christmas Eve." "Oh, but," started Izzy, but she didn't really know what to say next. She had heard the giggling in the pergola. She had seen the tall dead grass move where somebody had just passed through, disturbing it. "Must have been the boys from the hall," muttered back Izzy, even though she was sure one of the gigglers had been a girl. "What are you talking about?" asked the old gardener, still occupied with his brush and his pots. "There's no boys up at the hall just now. Just like you, they broke up and went to their homes yesterday." He bent down and stroked the dog, while picking up another pile of dirty used pots from the greenhouse floor. "Well, there must be a few left that you don't know about," started Izzy. She was starting to feel very uneasy about the conversation, and again her body was racked with the goose over grave sensation as a chill ran down her spine. "I was just in the sheep's field walking Caesar, along the hedge next to the pergola, and I heard children playing," lied Izzy. She didn't want to admit that it had been her who'd been playing. She wanted Mr. Elliot to see her as older, wiser than she actually was. She didn't know why, but it had always seemed important to her that Mr. Elliot liked her, shared his time with her, and told her his stories of times from long ago. The old gardener stopped in mid-brush of his latest pot and looked down, straight into the girl's eyes. Izzy saw the man's Adam apple bob as he swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. He was talking in a softer voice, almost sharing a secret with the girl he always thought looked so lost with the world. "Miss Isabel." As he started to speak, he lifted his grubby, calloused workman's hand and gently placed it onto her shoulder. "This world is a strange and beautiful but very misunderstood place. For the most part, and through the lives of most people, it is just black and white. There are only two sides to every story. For instance, love, hate, passion, resentment, north, south, east, west, hunger, greed, rich, poor, but mainly there is what is and isn't." Taking a deep breath, he continued, "Miss Isabel, sometimes boundaries can blur, and where there was once only black and white, there can in fact be grey. The pergola you mentioned, now that is a place of grey, of yet unknown and unexplainable things." Izzy must have had a startled expression on her face as she had listened to the old man speak, as his face broke into a grin. "The grey won't hurt you, Miss Isabel. It just takes a whole different kind of understanding to the black and white bits. If I were you, I'd leave the grey bits alone until you're ready to open your whole heart to a whole new kind of understanding. Some people will never have it, will never see the inner depths that surround us, but also some are chosen by the great to see deeper than anyone has ever seen before. But always remember, just stay true to yourself, trust your own instincts, and never be frightened, because if you are one of the chosen, then they want you for a reason, and that makes you special. Finished the gardener. Lightening the mood, he went over to another table in the greenhouse, picked up another brush and passed it to Izzy. Here, don't just stand there, these pots won't stack themselves. Izzy didn't know what to say, so she took the brush, picked up a pot and slowly started to brush it out. Her head rung with the words that the old man had just spoken. Grey bits? What grey bits? What did he mean by chosen? She had so many questions she wanted to ask, and she was just about to put them in order in her head before asking the old man, when suddenly the silence was shattered with a shrill beep beep, beep beep. It was Izzy's mobile phone, and it made her, the gardener and the dog jump out of their skin. Apologising, she took it from her coat pocket. Mum's mobile, the screen read. Pressing the read button, she read aloud, come home, lunch ready, and got some good news for you. Kiss, kiss, kiss. A huge smile spread across Izzy's face. It was the first time in a very long time that she'd felt so excited, so happy, and she instantly longed to be at home, listening to her mother's good news. Best be off with you then, Miss Isabel, and mind you don't forget this beast, the old man gestured towards the patiently waiting Labrador. Bye then, Izzy shouted as she ran out of the greenhouse towards her home, her lunch and her mother's good news, while still trying to make sense of the words just spoken by the gardener. Izzy burst into her home, letting the mirror bang as it shut the door behind herself. The dry heat of the fire enveloped her in a sudden warm wave. She hadn't realised she'd been cold until the heat of the room started to thaw her out, making her fingers and nose tingle as they slowly came back to life. She felt quite excited and full of anticipation. What could this good news be, she thought to herself. Good news was not a frequent visitor to the Henley family, and she thought of it, and the thought of it had Izzy beaming with an ear-to-ear grin as she went into the kitchen for lunch. She had images of double riding lessons this month as an added Christmas present, or her parents having a sudden windfall of cash and about to tell her to get ready as they were going to go and find her a suitable pony that was going to be hers forever. Flickering images of the stunning show pony Prancer's dance, the pony of Izzy's dreams, came to the forefront of her mind, making her giddy with excitement. Claire Henley had prepared the usual cold weather midday meal of thick vegetable soup with a small mountain of cheese and pickle sandwiches in the middle of the table for dunking. Her father was already back from his morning's work fixing broken fencing in the parks. Izzy knew he'd been true to his word about bringing home some more wood, as she could hear the wet timber hissing and spitting in the grate next door. Well, sit down then, said Mrs. Henley to her clearly very overexcited daughter. I don't think I can, replied Izzy, not until you've told me the good news. Sit down, came her father's voice, not in a nasty way, but stern enough for Izzy to know that he must be very hungry, and etiquette at the table was that no one started eating until everyone was sat down. At the same time, Jack rushed in, saying how sorry he was, but he had just been catching up with his old school friend Steve. You only saw him yesterday, exclaimed Mrs. Henley. What on earth do you two have to talk about after you see each other for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week anyway? Oh, you know, Jack started back at his mother, smiling. Steve went to the cinema last night and he was telling me all about it. Sounded like a dead good film, so I made him tell me the entire plot. Izzy smiled at her brother. He was so very different to her in the way he viewed his life. Jack was more than happy hearing about someone else's lovely evening out at the cinema. At 15, he knew perfectly well that his parents could not afford to take them to the cinema very often. But instead of it eating away at his soul, like what not owning a pony did to Izzy, he would sit and listen, or email to his friends all day long, enjoying every sound of someone else's pleasures. It made Izzy feel ashamed of the way she carried on, especially last night. She secretly wished that she was more like Jack, and could be just as content with her own life, but she couldn't, and she knew it. "Well," Mrs. Henley started as she took her seat at the table, "Isabel, this morning I've had Mrs. Hines on the phone. She and Pamela would love you go over to Home Farm tomorrow for the day, and they've even invited you to stay the night so that you and Pamela can spend loads of time together doing lots of horsey stuff. How exciting is that?" "Oh," groaned a devastated Izzy. "That's great. It's really great." She tried to sound as enthusiastic as possible. Oh, help, she silently thought to herself. What was her mother trying to do to her? The pain inside was just like salt on an open wound. A wound she knew wouldn't heal by watching Pamela Hines showing off with her own 3 ponies and talking about all the fun stuff she always had to do with them. "Thank you," Izzy said calmly to her parents. She was going to try desperately hard to be more like Jack. "Thank you. I'd love to go over and spend the night with Pamela." She hoped she'd sounded sincere, but inside she felt like she was being torn apart. How she had wished it had been an extra riding lesson. The riding school was full of girls just like herself, clinging to their favourite ponies and longing to have one of their own. Listening to Pamela drone on about her 3 was going to be torture, and Izzy knew it. It was one of the shortest days of the year, and by just after 3 p.m. the night was starting to set in. Izzy took a huge pile of ironing she'd just done up the steep stairs to her very cold bedroom. She wouldn't be long, she told herself. Far too cold to hang about up here when the fires are on in the lounge, she told herself. But as she entered her room she was drawn to the window. Through the haze of the settling darkness she looked down onto the stable yard. Her eyes moved to the high boundary wall and then onto the trees that made up the pergola. Instantly Mr. Elliott's word came back to her, words she'd forgotten as she'd rushed back home for lunch, so full of excitement at the good news her mother had for her. "If I were you, I'd leave the grey bits alone until you're ready to open your heart to a whole new kind of understanding." The old gardener's words echoed around inside her head. She looked deep into the pergola, scouring the thick leaf-strewn ground, looking for any sign of life, any signs of the grey that Mr. Elliott had spoken about. Suddenly the goose over grave spine chill came back, and Izzy felt very, very vulnerable, alone. She plonked her clothes quickly on the bed and dashed for the safety and warmth of the lounge and her family within it. Maybe the old gardener was right. Maybe she should leave the grey bits alone. She had never felt anything before in the 10 years she had lived here at Reddock, but now the place was starting to give her the creeps. Izzy could not begin to comprehend what Mr. Elliott had meant by the grey bits, but she had a very strange feeling that she was about to find out, and because of that, her life was about to change forever.